Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Good government groups are divided over a redistricting amendment that will appear on the November ballot. It creates a supposedly independent commission to draw up new legislative districts after the next census. That's a process currently controlled directly by state legislators. Nick Reisman of our sister station in Albany explains how this plan would change all of that.
This November, voters will consider a change to the state's process of drawing boundaries for congressional, state senate, and assembly districts. But for good government advocates, the language before voters on the ballot is loaded, especially when it comes to calling the commission that's drawing the lines independent.
But in this case, they're describing it as independent when it's anything but. The legislature appoints the members of the commission, the legislature approves what the commission comes up with, and if they don't, the legislature gets to draw the lines themselves. Hardly seems independent to us.
The proposed redistricting commission is the product of a compromise between Governor Andrew Cuomo and state lawmakers in 2012. Cuomo settled for an altered redistricting process after threatening to veto lines drawn by state lawmakers. Now voters will have the final say, but at 155 words, the proposed constitutional amendment is potentially difficult for voters to comprehend.
It's just confusing. It's not concise. I mean, we suggested basically a short sentence that a voter could understand.
Also problematic for advocates is the removal of language that explained to voters that lawmakers had final approval over the new district lines.
And that language was taken out and replaced by something much more confusing and not nearly as clear.
Now, redistricting is an important force in state politics. It can either help keep incumbents in power, or it can make elections more open to challengers. And that's just what this new commission does, according to the League of Women Voters.
This will have no legislators that sit on the commission. There will be no lobbyists. There will be no spouses of legislators. So there is an actual sense that for the first time in this state, we could have what is really an independent commission.
Barbara Bartoletti says the commission is a major improvement from the current practice of allowing a lawmaker-driven panel to draw their own boundaries.
Does not say that the legislature can draw up its own plan. They get 2 bites at this commission apple, and after those 2 bites, they can amend according to certain criteria. They can't change it wholesale.
The next round of redistricting is scheduled for 2022. In Albany, Nick Reisman for Inside City Hall.
Further is the executive director of the Citizens Union, Dick Dady, the executive director of Common Cause New York, Susan Lerner, the president of the League of Women Voters of New York State, Sally Robinson, and the legislative director of the New York Public Interest Research Group, Blair Horner. Thank you all for being here. Good to see you. And Dick, let me start with you.
Sure.
How is this an improvement over the way redistricting is normally done?
Sure. This ends the self-interested process of where legislators draw their own lines, which has been the way it has been for the last 5 decades. It also creates a new set of rules that bans partisan gerrymandering and essentially has a clause in it that would discourage from lines that would discourage competition. It also prohibits the lines that favor or disfavor candidates or incumbents or political parties. So there's a strong anti-partisan gerrymandering provision in the Constitution. It also creates this independent commission that is politically balanced and has some distance and separation from the legislature so it can operate and be held accountable to the parameters set forth in the Constitution.
Now, I take it from your remarks, Blair, that the word independent is either inappropriate or somewhat euphemistic in this case. I mean, the legislators, they name the members of the commission and they have final sign-off at the end of the process, right?
They're about as independent as, I guess, a puppet would be considered independent. If you look closely, you'll see the strings. Our view, I mean, you talked about how we differ, and we all agree that the redistricting process in New York State is a mess. It's rigged to benefit the majority parties in both houses. Where we differ is this the right solution. We don't think that the commission itself is independent because the legislature ultimately makes the call. And secondly, we think that there are problems with the amendment itself, which are worse than the status quo. One thing Dick didn't mention is this proposed constitutional amendment requires that the new map makers would have to work off the existing districts. The existing already rigged districts would have to be in place, and they work from those lines. And we don't think that's right.
Well, I mean, in this modern age, Sally Robinson, I mean, you push a button and you can sort of, by computer, put anything in place. So whether you start with a particular set or not, there's a fair amount of creativity or change that could come into the process, right?
Yes, there is. And it's interesting you say that about pushing the button, because one of the things that the amendment provides for is that the new independent commission is going to have to put all of the data that it is using up on a public website accessible to the public to make their own maps.
Mm-hmm. And is the issue here, Susan, that you have to get the best possible change that will be palatable to the legislature, since in the end they're going to control this process?
Well, I think the problem with this amendment is it doesn't do what the voters need it to do. It leaves the legislature in control through proxy or puppets, as Blair said, and it doesn't set up an impartial redistricting process, and that's what voters want. It locks in political control because the commission has to be appointed according to political party, and the voting rules are by political party. And when you start with gerrymandered maps, our experience is that you end up with gerrymandered maps, and the language is very carefully drawn to be confusing and ultimately not to allow there to be real reform.
Well, I want to talk about the confusion, the language in a minute, but I mean, Bill Clinton has this great saying that, you know, you can take the politics out of a lot of things, you can't take the politics out of politics. The legislature controls this process any way you look at it, whether they name a group of people, whether they vote on it at the end, whether they get involved twice in the middle, in some ways is really kind of beside the point, right? I mean, you cannot seriously expect them to vote themselves out of having a great deal of power that they currently hold. Right?
In other places they have, and in other places you do have impartial redistricting. And when you go to the voters and you ask them, what do you want? They want impartial redistricting, not redistricting that's run for the benefit of the political parties, to keep the political parties in power.
That's what we have right now, is that the leaders, the legislature draws their own lines. This does create an impartial process, given the criteria we just talked about. It does, require that the commission comply with these new rules, and it also, presents the plan as is, and that's why New Yorkers need to vote yes for proposal number one, because it takes away power for the first time ever from the legislature. To think that we can take power away entirely is a red herring. I mean, our state government is set up that the legislators are not going to take themselves out of this entire process, but it does create a new process, and this is a bird in the hand that's worth two in the bush.
On this question of the language, Blair, I mean, are you making? I'm having a hard time believing that anybody's going to go into the voting booth in November and, after they voted for everything else, go and find this thing and read these hundreds, right, on the back of the ballot, and find these 150 words and read them for the first time and interpret them. I mean, isn't the specific wording of it really kind of beside the point?
Well, but the first time that people are really going to start to think about it is when they see the actual language. We saw this on the casino amendment last year, where the language was gamed to advance the casino amendment so that people would vote for it. And the polling told you quite clearly that when you change the wording a certain way, you got a desired result. When you call this independent, and the legislature is making the final call with the governor, just like they do now, that's not an independent process, and yet that's what the language will say when people go to the polling place, and we don't think that's right.
Which is why we've sued to get the language fixed.
Well, it's interesting that you should mention that, because Sally Robinson, I am assuming that either the legislature under any scenario is going to deadlock and it'll end up in court, or they're going to sue their own commission and it's going to end up in court, or the good government groups will sue everybody and it will end up in court, and a judge is going to redraw the next set of lines anyway.
So why should we put in our Constitution a system that's designed to guarantee millions of dollars in litigation for decades to come, when we can do a lot better and when we have the time to get it right?
And in Florida, 4 years ago, voters put in a very similar anti-partisan gerrymandering clause into their constitution. The League of Women Voters sued, and a judge ruled in the interest of the citizens and threw out 10 districts in Florida and said to the legislature, you violated the Constitution and you need to start from scratch. And this gives New Yorkers, for the first time, power over the redistricting process. And what is wrong with that, in giving New Yorkers that power to ensure that we have an impartial plan with nonpartisan districts?
Just mentioned interesting to bring up Florida, because 2 days ago there was an article in Florida about how the groups are still complaining, even under the new lines. Secondly, in Florida, at the end of the day, it's the courts that draw the lines, not their legislature. That's a big difference, and there's no language in the Florida Constitution that says, oh, by the way, you have to work off the existing districts. They don't have anything like that. We think they should start from scratch, and someone at the end of the day
lawsuit was
should
on
make
the anti-gerrymandering provision, which is virtually identical to the one that's in the amendment.
But you don't have exactly what Blair pointed out, which is the criteria which trumps all of the other criteria. The mandatory start from the gerrymandered districts, respect them, don't change them too much. And what that means is that when the maps are drawn, that's what the commission, under the direction of the legislative leaders, is going to do. So we're going to have the great maps that everybody hates now, and we're going to have them perpetuated with minor variations for decades to come. We don't have to really settle for that. Why should we settle for a bad system and make it worse?
They're appointed by the legislative leaders. They're not operating at the direction of the legislative leaders. They are one step removed, whereas now they are actually the legislators.
Well, for your viewers, though, think of one example in Albany where anything was ever created that was independent. I mean, there's something like the Moreland Commission that comes to mind.
And the clause that's being talked about here about respecting the core districts, we're not talking about the appendages that we're so critical of. We're talking about the core, the centers of the districts, because of the need for legislative representative stability. All this criteria works in tandem with one another. It's not that one trumps the other.
We've only got 30 seconds left, but let me ask you, as I think the only group here that makes endorsements or finds recommended candidates, how does all of this change if the state Senate goes into Democratic control?
We saw it when it was in Democratic control, and they did not do anything about it. We had 186 legislators 3 years ago pledged to create a redistricting commission for 2012. And for people to think that we'll have another opportunity to change this in the next couple of years if this fails. I mean, a vote no is for continuing the status quo and giving the legislators the continued power to draw these lines.
A vote no is taking a bad system and making it worse. And what's really unusual about the provision is that the voting rules change. I've never seen this before, depending on the political control of the houses of the legislature.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it here for now. I'm sure we'll have a lot more. We'll have a lot more to talk about between now and November. But you've educated my viewers about something they will have on the ballot in November. Right now, we're going to take a short break. I'll be back in a minute with a preview of tomorrow night's program. Stay with us.
Okay, Matt.